You are listening to the Big Blue Marble Podcast with Anwar Knight.
Welcome aboard, my friends. Another edition of the Big Blue Marble Podcast officially underway. I'm Anwar Knight, your host. I appreciate you joining me. It is a busy show today, lots to unpack. Firstly, a big thank you to those of you who have subscribed to the Big Blue Marble newsletter. For those who don't know, it's a free email publication that we send out once a month, and it's filled with great, unique stories on our changing planet. There's only so many we can feature on the podcast, but these stories deserve to be told. Plus, it also gives you behind-the-scenes access to the show, special features, and not to mention details on our first official giveaway. You could win passes to the Hockey Hall of Fame here in Toronto. Contest details are in the newsletter. Really, really easy to win. Essentially, your ballot is the newsletter. We'll be drawing winners at the end of March. And you can sign up today, right now, in fact, on our website at bigbluemarble.earth. And our feature story for this month's newsletter is about a guy who recycles old cell phones to basically listen in for illegal loggers in rainforests around the world. The phones are placed high up in the trees, and they send out alerts when they pick up the sound of a chainsaw. I just thought it was so cool. And it's working. They've already caught people. They've arrested people. So you can read all about that and other stories in this month's edition of the Big Blue Marble newsletter. That'll be sent out in the coming days, and it's exclusive to our subscribers only. All right, today's show, let's get to it. Really fascinating and also alarming, too. If I were to ask you, how many breaths do you think you take in a minute? Say the average person. Let's say 10, 20? How about in the middle? Apparently, about 16 breaths per minute. That means we breathe about 960 breaths an hour, 23,000 breaths a day, and almost 8.5 million a year. And that's not including exercising or other types of vigorous activities. We'll see what those are. By the way, kids take 44 breaths per minute. It's almost triple of an adult. And that's important because with every breath, we are potentially sucking in poisons that are killing us. One UN report says air pollution kills 800 people every hour or 13 people every minute. That's more than 3 times the amount of people who die from malaria, tuberculosis, and AIDS combined each year. And hey, for the record, we aren't talking only about third world countries. In Canada, thousands of hospital visits and millions of days with restricted activity can be attributed to air pollution. It will shock you when you hear how air pollution impacts essentially every stage of our life and how your daily routine, like your morning commute, your drive into work, how it could be contributing to an early death. Episode 11, Hold Your Breath. The Air is Deadly starts now.
Have a question, comment, or show idea? Let us know at bigbluemarble.earth.
And joining us from Oxford, London, environmental journalist and author of a fascinating book titled Clearing the Air, The Beginning and the End of Air Pollution. We welcome Tim Smedley to the Big Blue Marble Podcast.
Yep, thank you very much for inviting me on.
You know, I've been trying to compile a list to determine what could be more important than the air that we breathe. And it really is no contest. I mean, food? Nah, we could live for weeks without food. Water? It was up there. It was number 2 on my list. But again, we could manage a day, maybe 2 without water. How about sleep? Very important. Your body needs to recharge. And without it, it would take its toll. But again, not immediate. But when it comes to air or oxygen, we need that every second of the day. And sadly, it appears that along with all the good stuff, we are sucking in a lot of the bad stuff, particles and pollutants that are attacking our body. And I know, Tim, you've traveled the world visiting various countries, researching, which would include inhaling, might I add, some of the dirtiest air on the planet. So was there one city in particular that stood out where you could actually feel the heavy polluted air?
Oh yeah, no question. The one that comes to mind is Delhi in India. Before going to Delhi, I'd only really written about air pollution in a more abstract sense and experienced the air pollution in the UK. And the UK has some, and London is one of the worst cities in Europe. But nothing compared to Delhi. So when I flew into Delhi, this is November 2017, to research for the book. As the plane was descending, I was looking down and seeing, a blanket of cloud, and thinking this was an overcast day, that I was flying into a grey day. And being a Brit, I'm used to returning to seeing overcast grey days. But as the plane got lower, I could see through this bank of cloud. It was translucent, and I realised it wasn't cloud at all. It was a sunny day. This was the top of the smog. So as I landed, from the ground, you look up, you can still make out a blue sky. It's clear that it isn't cloud, but this is quite a solid bank of particulate pollution, a constant smog that's there almost all day, every day in Delhi now. It only goes from bad to very bad to almost unbreathable. And just to continue the story, I checked on I took a monitor with me everywhere I went, and I checked, and the levels were in the 300s of micrograms per cubic meter. Now, to give you some context, so in my town in Oxfordshire, semi-rural, if it went into the 40s and 50s, I'd be very alarmed. Maybe if someone's burning a bonfire. So 300 is very, very high. I had seen 300, but only when testing my monitor next to the toaster and burning my toast. So this was extremely high. But when I got to my B&B, my wonderful host, who was very kind to me throughout the stay, actually said that these were good levels. That they had seen levels up into the 800s, 900s only a week or two before, and the street dogs were dying on the streets. So that was shocking, and it was a real eye-opener in what bad pollution looks like and feels like when you breathe it in. I mean, I took it easy when I was in Delhi. I made a conscious decision not to, walk too fast. You take it easy, because you don't want to be breathing in those levels too quickly.
Yeah, good call. I can't imagine what an 800, 900 reading would be like. And just for a reference point for our listeners, generally speaking, anything under 100 is deemed safe. And I know in different parts of the world they may have a slightly modified reading index, but for the most part, 100 is the safe threshold. We don't get 800 or 900 here in Canada. I mean, it would be very, very rare. Even during the extreme events, like the wildfire situation in BC last summer, the peak was around 425, if I recall correctly. And here in Toronto, we certainly have a handful of days in the summer when the smog does build up, and we can see it. But otherwise, there typically is no noticeable cloud of toxins that would prompt the average person to take action. For the most part, the particulate matter, the pollutants, are so tiny. It's not on our radar, but as I'm learning, that's deceiving, because it doesn't mean we have clean or pure air. So, Tim, how would you define air pollution?
Well, the basic definition of air pollution is anything in the air that's artificially there, that shouldn't be there. So typically that's from man-made sources. I mean, you could argue if you were standing near a volcano, it's polluted air. Fair enough, but we're not normally stood near volcanoes. Typically, we're stood near...
That's your next book.
Yeah, clearing the volcanoes. Yeah, I'll give that a go. But yeah, it's any pollutants in the air that are bad for us. Now, there are thousands of different pollutants that this is the case, but in my book and when I've been talking about it more recently, I tend to bring it down to what I call the big three air pollutants. So this is particulate matter, or PM 2.5. These are the tiny little solid particles that float around in the air. So smoke is an example. Nitrogen dioxide, NO2. This largely comes from vehicle exhaust fumes. And then ozone, and you get ozone typically in summer when you get NO2 mixing with sunlight and mixing with VOCs, volatile organic compounds. These are another category of pollutant, but they're not always bad for you. But when they mix with those other two things, you get ozone. And together those cause the vast majority of deaths from air pollution, just those three air pollutants.
Yeah, and that's the fact that strikes me the most here. Air pollution is killing people, lots of people. The World Health Organization says 9 out of 10 people frequently breathe in dangerous levels of polluted air, and that millions of people a year die due to air pollution. So why do you think we're so complacent as a society when it comes to air pollution?
I think it's because pollution nowadays is mostly too small to see. So as you said, in North America, you tend not to see air pollution. The particles are too tiny. The gases, being gases, are not visible. And we look at the headlines around the world of, say, a Beijing smog or a Delhi smog and think that's air pollution. In fact, invisible smogs can be just as dangerous, and they cause thousands of deaths. So a way of bringing this into kind of perspective in terms of how these deaths are caused. So according to the World Health Organization, 1/3 of all deaths from stroke, lung cancer and heart disease are caused by air pollution. So we probably all know someone that's had a stroke or died from stroke. We may all have family members that have heart disease. 1 in 3 chance that that's caused by air pollution in their area. And you don't need to be living near a huge pollution source for this to be the case. We are all living near huge pollution sources insofar as we all use roads every day. And roads are full of vehicles burning fossil fuels in quite huge volumes. And this pollution is the stuff we can't see, causing just tiny particles that can actually get into our bloodstream. So the story of places like Delhi is only half the story, and they're extreme cases. But anywhere in the world where there is where there's stuff being burnt, whether that's fuel in an engine or solid fuel in a fire, that's causing air pollution that's dangerous to our health.
Well, then that leads me to think that the reality is we all should be wearing masks and have a meter clipped onto our belts.
But you know what, there's an argument for the second one. So I do carry a little meter with me wherever I go.
Yeah, you're that guy.
But I'm that guy. But I mean, you know, if you write a book about something, you end up with a geeky interest in it, no matter what you do. The first bit about wearing a mask. So I guess there's good news and bad news about masks. The bad news is they don't really do much. So we're talking about tiny particles here, and the nanoparticles are the ones that can get into your bloodstream. So these are so small that you can't filter them out, really. I mean, no filter can trap a nanoparticle. And then also the gases.
Okay, hold on, time out. I want to be sure of this, and we'll leave out the coronavirus emergency as a completely separate entity here.
Yeah.
But in terms of air pollution, are you saying that masks are pointless, won't do any good?
Yes and no. So the yes is it's very good at trapping and filtering out the larger particles. So if your local air pollution problem comes from smoke or comes from wildfires or wood smoke, then yes, I would wear a mask. That makes sense because you're trapping these larger black carbon particles. Those would be filtered out. But my point is, in urban settings where there's no smoke risk or wildfire risk, where the air looks clean, but you have lots of cars going through every day, that modern engine emissions are too small to be filtered out mostly by masks. And also there's another argument about masks that if you wear them while cycling or jogging, they need to be incredibly tight-fitting to work, for one. But also, that if they're so tight-fitting, they make you breathe harder and faster in order to breathe, and you may be counteracting the point of wearing them, if you see what I mean.
Oh, I do. Yeah, I get it. In fact, I remember reading an article that talked about jogging in an urban environment, on the sidewalks of a busy city. And while you think you're doing your body good with regular exercise, you're in fact harming your body more, because you're physically exerting yourself, inhaling all of this pollution. So you'd be better off just walking inside a shopping mall.
Well, do you know what? Answering that question was one of the things that got me into writing this book. I can't remember the exact situation, but I was certainly in London at the time, and I saw a jogger running down a main road, and I thought, is that good or bad for them? Someone was taking the time to go for a run on their lunch break. Was this a good or a bad idea? Now, the answer's a reasonably complicated one. Now, actually, running and cycling in urban areas tends to be overall good for your health, because you are improving your overall ability to deal with health pressures. So you're improving your fitness, and that in turn improves your immune system. However, if you run along really busy roads, you then may be dipping into the negative. So if you've got an option to run on quieter side streets or run in a city park, do that. There's really little problem there. But if you're running right next to a huge source of pollution, and again, we sometimes forget that a main road is a huge source of pollution because we can't see it, but it is, then yes, you may be doing your health some damage. But there's a big but here. So on a major road, there's a hierarchy of who's the most exposed to pollution. And it's not the walker that's most exposed. It's not the cyclist that's most exposed. It's the driver. So study after study finds that the pollution levels inside vehicles, inside cars, are far higher than they are outside, because you're essentially trapped in a bubble of pollution. You are breathing the pollution from the exhaust fumes directly in front of you and behind you and around you. So it's all about proximity to source. So at least the cyclist who is on that busy road is getting the benefits of wind flow and airflow around them.
You know, this is really something, because there are literally millions of people that commute every day, there and back, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. In some cases, some people do a 90-minute commute one way. And you're saying studies show that when you're in bumper-to-bumper traffic, you are essentially actually strapping yourself into this chamber of poisons twice a day, 5 days a week.
Yeah. there's no way of sugarcoating it. Yes, you are, and it's that slow-moving bumper-to-bumper traffic. It's that daily grind of a commute. That is the worst. Now, I may be preempting a question here, but in terms of what could you do about it if that's you as the driver? Well, there are some things you can do. So obviously, if there is a public transport option, if there's a train or a bus, that's much better for you. I mean, yes, buses also have big engines with exhaust fumes, but the impact of many more people sat inside is slightly, I guess, diluted. But ideally, and we're seeing it in many more cities now, ideally that bus will be electric. If you write to your local politician and say what's happening with electric buses in our city, because this isn't about waiting for tomorrow's technology. This is widely available. Cities through Europe are now buying electric buses. China has gone all guns blazing, although that's probably the wrong phrase for electric buses. So the city of Shenzhen, every bus in Shenzhen is electric, and Shenzhen's another one of these mega cities. So we're talking, I think it's 20,000 buses, or all the buses, all the taxis too are electric. So electric vehicles are good news when it comes to air pollution. So imagine if you're in that slow-moving, grinding traffic, if you're in an electric vehicle and the cars in front of you are also electric, you're not really breathing in the pollutants I talked about earlier. You're not going to breathe in any NO2. Ozone's very unlikely to be formed, and particulate matter is much reduced in that slow-moving traffic situation. Also, cycle lanes are great. Cycling, if you can, is great. But obviously it's not an option for many, but within urban areas especially, cycling is a really good clean air form of transport.
But is it because you're going faster than you would be walking? I see many, bike couriers riding through the streets of Toronto, a lot of them having a face mask. Is it because you are in motion, so you're getting that wind effect?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't necessarily say that cycling's better than walking. It's just as a vehicle, as a form of transport, you're going to be able to get around quicker in a bike. It's just a more realistic option to get from A to B if you need to get across town. Yeah, walking's probably best of all, really. So the phrase is active transport. So walking and cycling, using your own 2 feet, using your pedal power, your foot power. This is the way that cities need to go, making walking and cycling the first and easiest option, and public transport, electrified public transport too.
You mentioned India and China as the leaders for the world's worst air quality, although likely in the last few weeks Australia has claimed that title with the devastating bushfires. But where does Canada rank? What's our biggest concern?
Well, I wouldn't claim to be an expert on Canada, but from a bit of research I've done, I know that Canada would rank pretty low on a table of worst air pollution countries, but the latest estimates are over 14,000 deaths in Canada every year from air pollution related disease. Now, it's easy to kind of feel, to say these numbers and for them to be meaningless, but 14,000 deaths is a lot of deaths. So there are around 1,800 deaths from road traffic accidents in Canada, for example. So if that 1,800 were to suddenly go up to 14,000, there'd be a national outcry. This is a lot of deaths, and also we don't need to get too fixated on the death figures, because we're talking about quality of life as well, reduced quality of life. I mentioned the 1/3 of all strokes, lung cancers and heart disease. So people are living with these conditions, and that are deteriorating their quality of life. Now, Canada, as I say, is a relatively low risk country, but then again, if you are living or working near a busy road, you have the same risks as anywhere else. You have that exposure to nanoparticles and NO2. Now, in terms of perhaps more Canada-specific issues, you mentioned Australia recently. Australia is having the worst air pollution it's ever had by a long, long way. Devastating. We're talking levels far higher than I saw in Delhi. And this is purely from wildfires, from forest fires. Now, Canada has its own wildfires and forest fires. We're seeing them getting worse steadily every year. And we know that with a changing climate, with a drier climate, those fires will get worse. And we will start to see, I certainly hope we will never see the levels we're seeing in Australia, but there is a concern there. And certainly wildfire smoke in summer in Canada is a risk, and we do see some smog situations occurring because of that. The other thing I'd also add is using logs as a form of heating during winter. So log burners, log fires. I don't know how prevalent that is where you are, but even where I am is still quite prevalent. Now, essentially, that's inviting the same type of pollution into our neighbourhoods, into our homes, as the wildfires. So we're talking about biomass burning dense wood, which causes the same pollutants to appear in our atmosphere. So black carbon from the wood smoke, benzene, a carcinogen, PAHs, a really nasty group of carcinogens. These all come from log smoke. So we have a kind of a romanticized image of log fires in winter, but we need to lose that romantic image.
You are so right. Think of the song, Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire.
Yeah, exactly. Chestnuts roasting on an open fire and releasing carcinogens into the air, which should be the full line of that song.
Let's hope not. All right, let's hope not. But all kidding aside, you mentioned log burning in Canada, and in the province of Quebec, it's huge. And routinely, air quality statements are issued in the winter there because a large number of people still rely on log burning stoves as a primary heat source. So, of course, it creates excessive levels of pollution from the smoke there. In fact, in Montreal, after vehicle emissions, wood burning is the number one source of fine particle pollution, so much so that they've banned older wood-burning stoves now. But, what strikes me the most here is that we all think that the first line of defense when it comes to pollution is to head indoors. It'll be safe there. But that's not a guarantee.
Well, yeah, you mentioned if you head indoors, it can be a refuge from air pollution. That is partly true, except if your home is a source of the pollution. So, yeah, log burning stoves, we think of the smoke as shooting up the chimney and we don't see it again. Again, that's not true. If you have an air pollution monitor inside your home, you might not be seeing the black smoke, but you will see high gas levels. You will see high PM2.5, the tiny particle levels. I had one scientist tell me it was kind of the equivalent of running a 7.5-ton diesel truck directly outside your home if you have your log fire running. So we don't think of that, and we should. And so not only is it not true that smoke disappears out the chimney and you don't see it, if everyone in the neighbourhood's smoke is disappearing out the chimney, you have really quite bad smog levels. And in winter, we have something called a low air barrier level, which is, if you kind of picture the underside of clouds, that's much lower in winter because we have a colder ground, so the clouds form closer to the ground. So we are breathing in a much narrower strip of air than we do in the summer, and yet we're filling that narrow strip of air with the worst pollutants we can, heavy log smoke and coal smoke.
I still don't get it. Wood burning is so prevalent, not just in underdeveloped nations, it's widespread here in North America. As you said, romanticizing the open fire, especially during the holidays. But why aren't people caring about this? Why isn't this out in the open? You would think, if no one else, insurance companies would be all over this. As a homeowner with a wood-burning stove or fireplace, you're now a liability, in terms that you now could get sick. And to be fair, perhaps more so with an older model, newer wood-burning stoves are likely much more efficient and safer. But the point is, it may increase your odds of getting sick, a disease like cancer. I know for a fact here in Canada, they do regulate and mandate certain installation procedures, the height of the pipe, etc. But why aren't we getting on this? On one hand, it seems so basic, and on the other, a real tragedy.
Yeah, it's a good question, and one I don't necessarily have the answer to, because it is a huge tragedy. As I mentioned, over 14,000 deaths in Canada every year, 4.2 million deaths around the world every year. This is just from outdoor air pollution. 7 million if you include indoor air pollution. You're right. I would also expect health insurance companies to start picking up on this. I think the reason why not, some of this is quite emerging science, right? So when I was writing this book, largely between 2016, 2017, into a bit of 2018, so some studies were coming out then that were telling us new things, such as the specific size of particles that can enter into our bloodstream, for example. And I think that shifted the focus slightly away from this thick black smoke that we can see, that being the problem. So you mentioned regulating how high the stovepipes have to be and so on. That's really all to do with, ejecting the thick smoke.
Outside.
Outside, exactly. I think the issue of nanoparticles and gases such as NO2, I think the science has emerged relatively recently. However, recent enough for things to have been done already, for sure, and recent enough for us to wake up to this issue that if we have a choice, we don't need to burn solid fuel to heat our homes. That's if we have a choice. Some people don't. But if we do, you're not only worsening the air quality of your neighborhood, you're worsening your own health, your own health outcomes, especially if you have some underlying diseases such as, if you already have asthma or you already have a heart condition. You really got to think about how you're heating your home if you're using solid fuel.
And your research reveals some startling details on just how vast the damage from air pollution is, and it's lifelong, from babies to seniors.
Yeah, something that's kind of become known as the life course of air pollution, because we're seeing it affect every stage. So even before we're born, so low birth weights, fetal abnormalities. So much as with smoking. So if you're a pregnant mother smoking, we've known for a long time that that's a bad idea, and causes reduced birth weights. But exactly the same if you're living in areas of high air pollution. Now, for kids, as they grow, they're obviously developing. They've got virgin lungs, as it were, and if they're living in areas of high air pollution, it can really affect their development. So many studies, the most latest one in London, but this study was first done in California in the 1980s, have looked at children growing up in areas of high air pollution, and they've found quite consistently that children, when they reach adulthood, have stunted lung sizes, so up to 10% reduced lung capacity because of growing up near to busy roads, and specifically roads is what's been studied here. So that's fairly terrifying, and that's not something they get back. That's something they're stuck with for life. And then through life, yes, I mentioned the strokes, the cancer, the heart disease risk. But then as we get a little bit older, there's very strong links now between air pollution and dementia and Alzheimer's. And this is studies finding particles lodged in the brain, essentially. It's not always clear exactly how they get into the brain, whether it's through our bloodstream or even directly through the olfactory bulb, so kind of through the top of our nose. So yeah, every stage of life, it seems, is being affected by air pollution. And again, as you say, why aren't people getting angrier about this? Why aren't people, marching on the streets about this. We're starting to see some of that happening, but really, I guess that's what I'm trying to do in my book is raise awareness, really, because we all need to know about this.
And exactly why we wanted you on the Big Blue Marble podcast. This is huge. You know, I have to tell you, while preparing for this interview, researching and through your book, it felt like I was in a way uncovering dirty little secrets. Poisonous air is everywhere, and some of the culprits in big business, like the shipping industry, it almost seems criminal in what they are doing.
Yeah, well, yeah, you mentioned shipping. They do come out as a bit of a baddie in the book. I interviewed a shipping industry official who basically admitted to me that the international shipping has been burning the equivalent of tarmac in its engines, the lowest grade of fuel, the dregs of the oil refining industry. We're basically being sold on the cheap to international shipping. Now, in some ways, we're all culpable for this, right? We've all benefited from cheap goods being shipped over or exports boosting our economies. But when those ships dock, when they land into port, they emit huge amounts of pollution into those port cities. So even in the UK, we have seaside port towns often registering as the most polluted towns or cities in the country, sometimes ahead of London, purely because of shipping. Now, shipping's kind of cleaning up its act. It's got new legislation coming in, well, kind of international regulations coming in, but it's still low-grade fuel. It's still bad fuel, way worse than the diesel you'd ever put in your car or truck.
Yeah, and they've been getting away with it for decades. So to be clear, if I understand the process, they've been using this leftover sludge that the oil industry has no use for. So, hey, this means they don't have to dispose of it. So let's sell it to shipping companies and make a small buck.
That's almost exactly what the shipping industry official told me on the record. Yes. Now he also is saying that it's cleaned up a bit and it's cleaning up a lot around the corner, but it's still decades behind where automobile fuel is, and hopefully electrification of ships can come in, but I mean that's not going to happen anytime soon.
No, yeah, you're probably right on that, at least when it comes to a long-distance solution. I know Norway seems to be taking the lead. They launched the world's first electric-powered container ship, but it only will be traveling 50 clicks, the distance is not far. The issue are the batteries. The weight of the batteries to carry cargo from Asia to Europe, it likely would be nearly half of the load on the ship, so that's not going to work. But in Norway, they're also implementing biofuel ships.
Norway is innovative and pioneering in a lot of ways when it comes to shipping. So they have got hybrids, the equivalent of Toyota Priuses. They've got hybrid large ships coming online. They have hydrogen-fueled ships. Hydrogen is great from an air quality perspective because as a fuel, the only stuff that comes out is water vapor, essentially. Now, biofuel, I don't know the specific mix they're using, but biofuel is still a liquid fuel that causes emissions.
It'll be at least a step up.
I hope so. I mean, the thing it would do that's good is it replaces oil, right? So it's replacing a demand for fossil fuel. That is good. But from an air quality perspective, I'd be interested to see the studies because it's likely to still produce sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and particulate matter. So, and I've seen studies of bioethanol in Brazil, for example, that have found that it's often as bad, if not worse, as diesel. So. We'll see, but yeah, hopefully that's a good news story. But I have my concerns.
Well, I'll certainly be keeping an eye on that. But at least, as you mentioned, now as we start 2020, the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, is mandating new emission standards. And yeah, it's far from perfect. But considering that tens of thousands of ships are burning more than 3 million barrels of this sulfur-rich sludge every day, there is at least a shift in the right direction. And it actually leads me to my next question about fixing the problem. Air pollution and climate change are very closely linked. The main driver of climate change is the burning of fossil fuels, and that, of course, as you've highlighted, is one of the major contributors of air pollution. So if we solve one, we will ultimately solve the other. But the benefits of reducing carbon emissions from fossil fuels, and it's something we have to do, period. But it'll take many, many years to see the benefits of that. But when it comes to air pollution, the turnaround can almost be instant, right?
Yes, right. And here's the good news about air pollution, and I'm glad we've got onto it because I was worried I'd start to depress you. But there is good news about air pollution, and that's exactly it. So a lot of the pollution sources are local, and the benefits of reducing or eliminating those sources are instant and dramatic. So in a typical town or city, so we're not talking about wildfire smoke here swirling around. We're talking about a typical town or city on a normal day. Your pollution sources are traffic. They are traffic emissions with some residual amount from, say, solid fuel being burnt in restaurants or in houses. Now, if you take action to change that traffic mix, so if you introduce electrification, if you introduce cycle lanes to make it easier to cycle around, if you make walking, pavement, sidewalks much better, much easier, if you replace that traffic source of emissions, you can clean up the air that you breathe. Now, obviously, that sounds really difficult, but we are seeing cities do it, and even if you have action in your neighbourhood. So I've mentioned wood smoke a lot of times. If you have a neighbourhood meeting and agree in your road that you're going to try and move away from solid fuel as your form of heating, again, that's going to have dramatic changes to the air that you're breathing. So yes, the great thing about air pollution is it's often localized, and you can solve it locally.
Well, let's take it one step further then. As a parent, and I know you're a dad too, what can we do to help safeguard our kids from inhaling all of this stuff in the air?
Well, I live in a town, and I walk my daughter to school and back every day. Now, I know some people drive that route, but it's quite a short walk. So we take the walk. Now, I think some people think that going in a car and sitting in the car, they're protected, but they're not. If you need to drive, it's a different story. So if you're going to a school far away, tens of miles away, then fair enough. If there's no transport link, public transport link, but if you can walk or cycle or use public transport, you are helping your kid out there. But also you're not adding another source of pollution onto the road. So yes, bringing up your kid walking and cycling is both good for their health and more likely to improve your local air quality. Now that's baby steps. I appreciate that, but as more people do it, we will see pollution reduced. Also, if you're renewing your car, if you have the money to renew your car and replace it with an electric vehicle, that's a good way to go. It really is. We need to see electrification really pick up pace now, and we are seeing it. More and more models are coming online every year, and they're getting cheaper and cheaper, and their ranges are getting longer and longer. So we can protect our children that way. I mean, at the moment, if you're driving your kid a short distance in a diesel vehicle, that's the worst thing you could be doing for them. So we can replace that with either driving them a short distance with an electric vehicle, or ideally walking that distance or cycling that distance or taking the bus. And as I say, get onto your local politicians about electric buses because they need to be electrified, and it's very readily available technology now.
Yeah, and some major cities have pledged to do just that. Paris, Los Angeles, Barcelona, here in Canada, Toronto, Vancouver. In fact, the officials in Vancouver say on their pilot project, with each bus, it should reduce 100 tons of greenhouse gas emissions and save about 40 grand in fuel costs per year compared to a conventional diesel bus, which is great. So just as we wrap up, is there any place on Earth that you know of where we would find what you consider pure air?
Well, do you know what? I think you're likely in it.
Yay!
I think rural Canada, in parts of rural Canada, away from habitation, it's got to be. It's got to be, right? I mean, funnily enough, I came across a story for my book, and I think it was around 2015. There was this Canadian startup company that was shipping out cans of Rocky Mountain air to China and selling them for $15 a can. And I think they did quite well from this. So yeah, probably rural Canada's got to have some of the closest to pure air. So yeah. Canada's resource-rich in many ways.
Oh, I feel whole now. You've redeemed yourself. Smiles all around. This has been great, Tim. Thanks so much.
You're more than welcome. I appreciate you having me on. And just whilst this is in my head, that one other thing people can do to protect yourselves or protect your kids, if you've got a choice of taking a quieter road, a side street rather than a main road, by walking or cycling, that's always better. So try and avoid those main road systems wherever you can, because those are going to be the highest sources of pollution. And replace your log burner if you've got one with an electric fire.
Solid right till the very end. Thanks again, Tim.
Thanks, Samuel.
My guest has been Tim Smedley, environmental journalist and author of Clearing the Air, The Beginning and the End of Air Pollution. Published by Bloomsbury, you can find it at your favorite bookstore. After that interview with Tim, the wheels in my head were spinning. You know, there are so many things that seem to go on here that we don't have a clue about. As the general public, we just assume someone is making sure that the right thing is being done. If it was dangerous to our health, couldn't be happening here. Somebody would put a stop to it. And I'm talking specifically in how the shipping industry has been operating. And to be fair, as Tim mentioned, we are all blameworthy. To some extent, because a lot of the goods that we use, and I know this, at some point likely was transported on a ship. It is simply the most cost-effective way to transport goods, so we benefit from that. But what really stirs me up is what the cruise ships are doing. Because we're not talking about transporting tangible goods. We're talking about operators that sell an experience. Come sail the seas. The cruise ship industry appears to be full of filthy players, perhaps not all, but consider this. Carnival Corporation, the world's largest luxury cruise operator, Carnival Cruises, right? One study that was done by the European Federation for Transport and Environment found that Carnival's ships, listen to this now, emitted nearly 10 times more sulfur oxide around European coasts than all 260 million cars in Europe did. And to be clear, this was 2017, but it found 7 of the 20 most polluting cruise ship lines were operated by brands owned by Carnival. And some of the ports, this was a European study, Barcelona, Venice, Southampton in the UK, Lisbon, and the UK's Health Protection Agency classified sulfur oxide as toxic and corrosive and likely to cause irritation of the nose and throat, and with higher concentrations can cause nausea, vomiting, stomach pain, and corrosive damage to the airways and lungs. Have you ever heard of this? Not me. First time I've learned about it. Royal Caribbean Cruises, the world's second largest cruise company, earned second place by being 4 times worse than all the European car fleet in terms of sulfur oxide emissions. I mean, this is just crazy. And again, this is from 2017. And yes, there are now new rules that have been implemented that became in effect officially last month. But look, at the end of the day, these guys didn't care. They didn't want to be an eco-leader. They could have said from the get-go, let's operate a business that is kind to the earth. Now, a Carnival spokesperson did say, this was in a statement, and I quote, "It strongly refutes the conclusions from the report as being inaccurate, misleading, and irrelevant," adding it was an apple versus oranges comparison between automobiles and ships. But you're spitting out sulfur. You don't say anything about that. Now, it may or may not matter to you. I hope it does. But to me, had I known that, I would opt not to support those practices. And full disclosure, I've been on some of those cruises. I ate like a horse at the trough, the death by chocolate midnight buffet, all that sort of stuff. But I never had a clue how they operated. You know, the last time I went on a cruise was probably about 20 years ago. But I know it now. And forget it. I'll do my homework and see if there's another option. See which company cares for the planet. And some of you say, well, do you fly, Anwar? And yeah, you're right. Flying is terrible. But that's my point. We all need to do our part. We need to figure out what we can do to make a difference. For me, going forward, if we ever decide to book a cruise, and maybe we will, but I will check what the company is doing. And that's where the change begins, my friends. As I said before, consumers have the power to force change. The onus is on us to see what these companies are doing and make a choice. Now, I hope these cruise lines, all the cruise lines, will go well beyond what is needed now, because your customers are tuned in. Thankfully, more than 170 countries have signed on to the IMO mandate in order to help clean up the sea and the air. The industry will have essentially to adopt one of three solutions. And if you want more information on that and more on this story, just check out January's newsletter, and I'll be glad to get it out to you right away at www.bigbluemarble.earth. But we're running long here. So just before we wrap up, I need to say a huge thank you to Muriel Kuhn, Raquin, Hugh Sturdy, and Michael Hainsworth from the Geeks and Beats podcast. Thank you so much, guys, for supporting the show, retweeting my show post to help get the word out. That's how we can make a difference. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Anwar Knight, and on Facebook at Anwar Knight TV. Please subscribe to this podcast and share it with your friends. Thanks again. I hope to have the privilege of your company again real soon. For now, I'm Anwar Knight, wishing you a great day on the Big Blue Marble.
That was another great show, Daddy.